All right, let's jump into another deep dive. Today we're heading to Nigeria, and let me tell you, it's a place facing some seriously heavy stuff. We've got reports, analyses, even firsthand accounts, and, well, the picture they paint is pretty intense, especially in the Northeast. You ready to dig in?
Yeah, what really hits me is how interconnected everything is. You've got the real world impact of violence, I mean, from groups like Boko Haram, ISWAP. But then to really grasp it, you need to look at the ethnic tensions, the lasting effects of colonialism, and even whether Nigeria should even exist as a single country at all.
Yeah.
It's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, no kidding. Not exactly a straightforward problem with a simple fix. But I guess we've got to start somewhere. And we can't just ignore the human cost of what's happening in the Northeast.
No, absolutely not. We're talking millions displaced, whole communities living in fear. And the impact on kids, man, that's what really gets to me. Just imagine abduction, forced recruitment, becoming child soldiers, sexual violence. I mean, it's a whole generation being robbed of its childhood.
Yeah, it's tough to even imagine how you rebuild from that. Can you even have a sense of normalcy when that level of trauma is so deeply rooted?
That's the question a lot of people are wrestling with. And that's where you see how insecurity just becomes this vicious cycle. Poverty, inequality, climate change,
Huh.
they all just feed the conflict, make it that much harder to build any kind of lasting peace.
It's like trying to put out a fire while someone keeps dumping fuel on it.
Yeah.
But we're talking about people's lives here, not just some metaphor. So where do you even begin to address something this tangled?
Well, that's why getting the historical context is so crucial. We have to look back at the British amalgamation in 1914. That's what basically created modern-day Nigeria as we know it. And, well, it was a decision driven by economics and administrative convenience, not really the well-being of the people actually living there.
So you're saying the seeds of today's problems were planted way back then?
It's a big part of the story for sure. And what's really eye-opening is that some of Nigeria's own leaders back in the day, they saw the potential for disaster even then. Figures like Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, Chief Obafemi Awolowo, they were voicing doubts about this whole forced unity thing, predicted conflict, hardship, if the core issues weren't dealt with.
Wow. So they were raising red flags over a century ago, and here we are, still wrestling with the same stuff. Makes you think about the legacy of being a quote-unquote British experiment, right?
Yeah.
How that still shapes Nigeria today.
That's a question worth thinking about, yeah. And it takes us to a pretty heated debate. Should Nigeria even stay one country? Some folks say this forced union is unsustainable, does more harm than good. They're all for secession, letting the different regions govern themselves. Others, they say, stay united, but with major restructuring. They want a system that actually addresses each region's needs and concerns.
So it's not a simple stay or go situation. Lots of nuance on both sides.
Yeah.
How do you even start to find common ground with such strong opposing views?
It's super complex. I mean, there's historical precedent for both paths. Countries that split successfully, others that restructured and came out stronger. The key takeaway, though, is that whatever path is chosen, it's got to be peaceful, based on dialogue and negotiation, not violence. What do you think about all this? Does hearing this change your perspective on, how nations are formed, how tough it is to stay united? Let us know in the comments. It's easy to get lost in the big picture stuff, the politics, the history, the whole should we stay or should we go debate. But we can't forget about the people actually living through all of this. These debates have real-world consequences for them.
Yeah, that's true. We can't lose sight of the human cost. There are some really heartbreaking accounts from people caught right in the middle of this whole crisis.
One report really highlighted the situation for kids in the Northeast. Imagine living in a place where abduction is so common, it's actually the most prevalent danger kids face.
It's hard to even wrap your head around that. And it's not just the physical danger, right? It's the psychological impact, too. The constant fear that your child could be taken.
Devastating for families, for communities. And it's not just abduction. It's, child soldiers, sexual violence. Education gets disrupted. It's like their futures are being stolen right out from under them.
And that just feeds right back into the cycle of insecurity we were talking about. It's like a wound that keeps getting ripped open, never gets a chance to heal. Makes you wonder, what kind of support is even possible in a place that chaotic?
That's a powerful image. It really makes you wonder how you start to deal with that level of trauma. But it's encouraging to see the work being done by groups like the UN, the Civilian Joint Task Force. They're working to reintegrate kids who have been involved with armed groups, offering support, a chance to rebuild their lives.
Sounds like a glimmer of hope, but man, it must be incredibly tough work. What stands out to you about their efforts? Are there any particular approaches that seem to be working?
Well, there are so many dedicated people working tirelessly, but yeah, the challenges are huge. And shifting gears a bit here, this whole debate about Nigeria's future, it's also tied up with these issues of identity, belonging. We're talking about a country with like over 200 distinct ethnic groups, each one with its own history, culture, language. To assume everyone wants the same future, it's just unrealistic, dangerous even.
Yeah, it's like looking at a map and seeing all these different colors and shapes, each one representing something unique.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine imposing one single vision on such a diverse place.
Exactly. One source made this really interesting comparison, saying that even groups that are often lumped together, like the Hausas and Fulanis, they actually have significant differences, like assuming all Europeans think and act alike.
Good point. When you force a one-size-fits-all solution on a diverse population, you're just asking for trouble. So how do you bridge that gap? Is there a way to reconcile the desire for self-determination with this idea of a unified Nigeria?
That's the million-dollar question. No easy answers there. But one source argued for looking at the potential benefits of decentralization. They pointed to examples from Nigeria's own past, like when the Western region successfully funded free education using their own resources.
That's like giving people ownership of their own destinies, right?
Yeah.
They're more likely to invest in something if they feel like they have a say. But wouldn't that just lead to even bigger disparities between regions?
Yeah.
What about the ones that aren't as resource-rich?
That's a valid concern, but people who support decentralization, they argue that it could actually encourage cooperation and collaboration. Regions would need to work together to ensure some level of, equity and opportunity for everyone.
So instead of this top-down approach where the central government controls everything, you have a system where regions solve their own problems, but they're also incentivized to help each other out.
Exactly. That kind of system could potentially lead to a more stable, resilient Nigeria overall. Allows for a more organic form of governance that's responsive to the unique needs of each region.
It's an interesting idea. Still kind of grappling with the potential downsides, though. What about national security? How would a decentralized system handle that?
That's a crucial question, and one that proponents of decentralization would need to answer convincingly. But before we get too deep into the weeds on that, there's another layer to this whole situation we haven't really touched on yet: the role of the military.
Oh, you're right. The military is a huge piece of the puzzle here. And some of the stuff we've read about their impact on the country is pretty disturbing.
Yeah, it's hard to overstate the damage done by decades of military rule in Nigeria. Human rights abuses, suppression of dissent, the erosion of trust in institutions. The impact is still felt today.
And it's not just a relic of the past either. The military is still a powerful force in the country. Its actions, both past and present, they had a huge impact on Nigeria's future.
Absolutely. One source argued that the period of military rule from 83 to 99, that was the longest stretch, and that really set the stage for a lot of the problems we see today. Understanding that context is essential when we try to analyze the current situation.
So as we try to process all this information, we need to factor in the role the military plays. Are they making things worse, or are they part of the solution? It's a complex issue, and it's not going away anytime soon. What are your thoughts on this? How do you think the military's role should evolve in a country that's trying to find peace and stability? Share your thoughts in the comments.
It's definitely something to think about, and it kind of brings up this fundamental question of accountability. Who's holding the power accountable when they're the ones causing the harm? It's like that whole who watches the watchman thing. When the institution that's supposed to be protecting people becomes a source of fear, well, that just creates this deep sense of unease, distrust.
Yeah, it makes building any kind of stable foundation for peace, for progress, it feels almost impossible, right? Like trying to build a house on shifting sand. It's clear the military's role in Nigeria, it's a sensitive topic and controversial.
You're absolutely right. And it's not just an internal issue either. The international community, they have a role to play here. We can't just sit back and watch this crisis unfold. But then what does meaningful intervention actually look like in a situation as messy as Nigeria's? Is it humanitarian aid, diplomatic pressure, sanctions even? What do you think?
Tough questions. It's easy to say we need to do something, but finding solutions that actually work, that respect Nigeria's sovereignty and really help people, that's a huge challenge.
It's not about throwing money at the problem or imposing our own ideas. It's about supporting the people who are already working on the ground, trying to build a better future for Nigeria, supporting civil society organizations, promoting dialogue and reconciliation, investing in education and economic development.
Sounds like it all circles back to that idea of self-determination, huh? empowering Nigerians to shape their own destiny, with support from the international community, not interference. But is that enough? Can a nation heal from such deep wounds, build a future where everyone feels safe, everyone has a chance to thrive?
That's the hope, right? The sources we've looked at, they give us a glimpse into how complicated these challenges are that Nigeria is facing. But they also remind us that there are people fighting for a better future, working to break that cycle of violence and build a more just, more equitable society.
Yeah, it's inspiring to hear about those people, those who are working so hard for positive change, even when things are so tough. It's a good reminder that even in the darkest times, there's still hope. But what can we do, as individuals to actually contribute to that hope?
Stay informed, engage with these issues, support organizations that are working on the ground, and maybe most importantly, challenge the people around you to think critically about how interconnected our world really is. What happens in Nigeria, it has ripple effects throughout the region and beyond. It contributes to the refugee crisis, it fuels transnational terrorism, it undermines global security. We're all connected, whether we realize it or not.
It's a sobering thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
That we can't afford to ignore the suffering of others. The quest for peace and justice, it's a global responsibility.
Absolutely. It's a responsibility we all share. So as you go about your day, remember the stories we've heard, the challenges we've explored, the questions we've raised. Let them fuel your curiosity, your empathy, and your commitment to building a better world for Nigerians and for all of us.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the complex world of Nigeria. It's a complicated story, but one that deserves our attention. Remember, even small actions can make a difference. Stay informed, stay engaged, and never lose hope.